My Picture Left in Scotland by Ben Jonson, 1572 to 1637. I now think love is rather deaf than blind, for else it could not be that she, whom I adore so much, should so slight me and cast my love behind. I'm sure my language was as sweet, and every close did meet in sentence of as subtle feet as hath the youngest he that sits in shadow of Apollo's tree. Oh, but my conscious fears that fly my thoughts between tell me that she hath seen my hundreds of grey hairs, told 47 years, read so much waste as she cannot embrace my mountain belly and my rock face, as all these through her eyes have stopped her ears. Okay, this poem is by Ben Jonson. Let's see, Ben Jonson was born in Westminster in central London, and he went to Westminster School. He was a very famous playwright and poet. I think he's probably rated as the number 2 in British playwrights. But that's the problem. Everybody knows William Shakespeare, who's number 1, but far fewer people know about Ben Jonson, number 2. So what's this about? Well, firstly, I'm going to look at the title. It says, My Picture Left in Scotland. So to me, this initially sounds like a painting that he has left behind in Scotland. But in fact, my picture, this is talking about the mental image, or the image, the idea people have of him after being in Scotland. And the poem is about a woman who he is in love with, and he is courting her, but she's not interested in him at all. So the poem is about unrequited love, it's about rejection. But the poem itself is very funny, because it says, effectively it says, I wrote her this brilliant poem, or this brilliant poetry, and she didn't like it, she was rude to me, and maybe she just saw how fat and old and ugly I am, and that's why she wouldn't listen to this fantastic poetry. Okay, I now think love is rather deaf than blind. So this comes from the phrase love is blind. You can, they say this, that if you're in love with somebody, you don't see any faults in them. They are perfect. But here he's saying, I think love is rather deaf. So love can't hear. And this, I think, is making reference to the fact that this woman wouldn't listen to his poetry, or she was not taken by his poetry. For else it could not be. So if love was blind rather than deaf, otherwise it would be impossible that she, whom I so much adore, should slight me and cast my love behind. So love's deaf, because otherwise it would be impossible that this woman who I adore so much should slight me, to be rude to somebody, and cast my love behind and throw away my love. So he's upset by this. He feels insulted that she didn't like him. I'm sure my language was as sweet as every close did meet in sentence as subtle feet, as hath the youngest he that sits in shadow of Apollo's tree. So I'm going to look at Apollo first. Apollo is supposed to be the god of poets. And here, sitting in the shadow of Apollo's tree, this is somebody looking for inspiration to write a beautiful poetry, and somebody who has been inspired by the god Apollo to write good poetry. So in this, he's saying that the poem he wrote, I'm sure my language was sweet, it was very good. And every close, the rhyme at the end of the poem, the ending of the lines, did meet in sentence as as subtle feet, as hath the youngest he. So the end and the way, the connection of the poem was as of subtle feet, was so agile, so skillfully written. It was as skillfully written as the youngest man who has been inspired by the muse of poetry. Yeah, so the poem I wrote was as fantastic as the best poem that could be written by a young man who has been inspired by Apollo to write poetry. So here he's saying, I'm certain my poem was fantastic. So he's very confident about himself. My poetry is close to that of the gods. And then he goes on, and this is where it changes. Oh, but my constant fears that fly my thoughts between. So now he's self-conscious, he's insecure, and he's now wondering why she rejected him, why she wasn't influenced by his poems. Yeah? And his conscious fears, his insecurities, yeah, and these are thoughts that are flying around his head. And these thoughts tell me that she hath seen my hundreds of grey hairs. So she saw that I've got lots of grey hairs. I'm old, so she thought I was old. Told 47 years. So the grey hairs in my head showed that I was 47 years old. At that time, very old. Read so much waste as she cannot embrace. So she saw that I had such a big waist, I was so fat that she couldn't hug me. Yeah, she couldn't get her arms round me. And she thought that I was firstly old and then fat. My mountain belly, so my huge stomach, and my rock face, so my face like rock. Yeah? The rock face is normally the surface of rock, so it's full of cracks and crags. So he's saying she must have seen that I'm old, that I'm fat, and that I'm ugly. As all these, through her eyes, have stopped her ears. So when she saw that I was old and fat and ugly, this stopped up, this sealed her ears. So these visions of old, fat and ugly came through her eyes, and they have stopped her listening to me. Yeah, and that's why she hasn't fallen in love with me. She wasn't moved by my beautiful poetry. So effectively, the picture that he's left in Scotland is of or that's what he thinks, is of an old, fat, ugly man. So, enough. If you enjoyed the video, give it a rating, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you soon. Bye for now. My Picture Left in Scotland by Ben Jonson.